met the guy who wrote that book, No Impact Man, at a farmer's market in the city many years ago. I don't know how long ago it was. I was visiting my mom. She lives in the city. And I just happened to talk to him. I bought the book and I read it, and it's really, really good. It's really funny. You don't realize what what the impact that every daily decision that you make has on the environment. So he went. His mission was to have absolutely no impact at all. And it wasn't easy, but it's a good read. It's a funny read. So thank you very much, League of Conservation Voters, and all of you for being here and taking time out of your Sunday to listen to your candidates. My name is Laura Curran. I'm currently a county legislator on the South Shore. But it was never part of my plan to get into politics. I have a background as a newspaper reporter and got into public service through my kids. I live on the South Shore, as I said, in Baldwin. My kids are in the public schools, and I wanted to do what I could to help our schools and my community succeed. So I ran for my local school board. And it really sparked an interest to step up and serve my community in a bigger way. So I ran for county legislator. And in my 4 years as a county legislator, I'm very proud to have worked across the aisle at times when it was the right thing to do for the people that I represent. And one of the things that I'm very proud about is I was able to restore bus funding to bus routes, 10 bus routes that were cut. I crafted a bipartisan solution that passed unanimously to restore routes to bus funding. And I know we're talking about the environment, so that is key. Public transportation is key to helping to protect our environment. But as proud as I am of my accomplishments on the legislature, I don't want to sugarcoat it. As a legislator, I've had a front row seat to the corruption, to the dysfunction, and to the mismanagement in our county government. And I want to fix it. I know who lives in our county. I know how hard people work, what high taxes they pay. And I truly believe that we deserve a government that lives up to us. And, when you read about the arrests and the indictments of all of our elected officials, that's just a very clear signal to me that the machine is breaking down and that government is not accountable to the people. So, with that, I'm happy to open it up to questions.
Terrific. And I think we'll start with Adrian. And our drill here is, everyone look at Josh Kleinberg. So 2 minutes for an answer. The orange piece of construction paper indicates 30 seconds to go.
Yes.
And the red piece of construction paper means...
Wrap it up.
Yes.
Okay.
You got that, Josh?
I got it. Go for it.
Okay, good. Good afternoon, Legislator Curran.
Good afternoon.
Nice to see you. Now, I think you know what my first question is going to be because...
Does that have to do with nitrogen?
Yes, well, that's it does. And that's not from coordination. She's obviously psychic, but I have a feeling that our next candidate might as well display that psychic ability. Percent of the nitrogen loading in the western bays on the South Shore of Long Island, and our western bays are dying. We have depleted fish stock, we have closed shellfish beds, we have wetlands that are degrading, and the solution is to combine Long Beach with Bay Park, and then take the treated effluent, use the water viaduct that is currently in place along Sunrise Highway, and discharge the treated effluent out of the Cedar Creek ocean outfall pipe. Will you expedite, the key word in this question is expedite the process of hooking up Long Beach to Bay Park, to the existing water pipe, to the ocean outfall pipe? Will you move this along so that the western bays can be restored and can once again thrive as a healthy ecosystem?
This is a very exciting project. So you may have heard that the county was trying to get an outfall pipe for Bay Park sewage treatment plant, but it's very expensive, and the county's not able to get the money from the state and federal government because it's a lot of money. So this is an example actually of how government can work well. We have some really smart guys in our Department of Public Works who had a eureka moment. They remembered, that there is a viaduct. Is it an aqueduct or a viaduct? I never get the word.
Both are good.
It is, okay, I'll call it a viaduct. There's a viaduct that runs underneath Sunrise Highway it's over 100 years old. It's from the old Brooklyn Waterworks. And it's so big that a grown man can stand up inside. So they said, how about, what if we can bring, instead of doing an outfall pipe from Bay Park, how about we can bring the water up to the viaduct, shoot it over, out down to Cedar Creek, about, I don't know how many miles it is, maybe 6 or 7 miles down the road. And then there's a 2-mile outfall pipe already there in Cedar Creek. Therefore, it's about half the cost. So they did a viability study, and from so far, it looks like it is viable. They're going to do like a polymer sleeve inside. Now, the key is expediting. We have to work very closely, if this is going to work, with the towns and the villages, because we've got to get the water, the treated effluent, from Bay Park up to the viaduct and then back down again. So we've got to work with those communities on either side to make sure that they understand what's going on and that they have buy-in. You know, this is not something that you want to shove down people's throats. You want to explain to them that this is excellent for the environment. It will reduce the amount of water going into the bay, the amount of nitrogen going into the bays immediately, which will begin to restore the shellfish. The marshland will come back. It doesn't take long. Once you stop dumping the nitrogen, nature just starts to take care of it immediately. Marshlands are so important because they act as a buffer against storm surge. Also, the shellfish will come back. It can come back for recreational use. It's good for the economy. It's a win-win-win. However, we've got to make sure that we engage the affected communities early.
Thank you very much for the
Nostradamus thing, but I think I know the answer to this. I've heard you before speak on this, but it's important.
Yes.
Yeah. So, but in all seriousness, this is an issue that has impacted folks, not just the environment, on a human level. Nassau County has some of the most dangerous roads in New York State for pedestrians and bicyclists. These conditions persist while there's an expansion of downtown housing, restaurants, bars, a growing 55 and up population, and record numbers of young people that are not seeking to drive for a variety of reasons. As county executive, what will you do to encourage walkability and complete streets while fixing the many poorly designed Nassau County roadways?
So I often talk about how transit-oriented development will be what saves us as a region. It'll keep our young people here, it'll keep our empty nesters here, it grows the tax base, it creates jobs, but our infrastructure doesn't quite support it. And there are places where it does, but there are places where we need to re-engineer what we already have. And I'll just give you an example. Where I am currently a legislator and where I live, in the hamlet of Baldwin, in the town of Hempstead, we won funding thanks to my very smart people that I work with and my staff. We were able to secure funding, a grant, $5 million grant to do a complete streets project. So what is that? That is redoing our main road, Grand Avenue, to make it more navigable for bike riders, for walkers, yes, for cars, and also for buses. So part of that was doing what you call a road diet, taking 2 lanes, going in each direction, turning it into 1 lane in each direction with a turn lane down the middle. Oh, that's okay. So for part of the road, it will be that's the plan for what's going to happen. So there was a lot of resistance, as you can imagine, when you try to do a road diet because people are concerned. They're concerned about change, and they're concerned that it's going to take them longer to get where they have to go. But with engineering the traffic lights in such a way, with making sure that you have the turn lanes fanned out in such a way that people can get through the lights in time, that will help make it more navigable. But when people can walk around, when people can ride their bikes, when there are different ways of getting around rather than just, going on your car as fast as you can, people tend to spend more money. People want to stop. They want to shop. That's good for economic development. But we have to engineer. I mean, we're built up. There's not much that we can do. So we can re-engineer what we already have, and what we're doing in Baldwin, I think, is a perfect example of that. That's something I'm looking forward to working with our zoning municipalities and the rest of the county to make sure that we bring this about everywhere that we can.
Thank you very much. Nick?
Follows on Eric's rather well, I must say. You mentioned transit-oriented development, and an important part of that is, of course, having good transit. We know that that's something that's slipping at the moment. Now, Governor Cuomo just recently announced the appointment of an advisory panel tasked with coming up with proposals to address the dual crises we face right now, which is growing congestion, traffic flowing into and out of New York City, and also the lack of funding for the MTA, which of course includes the Long Island Railroad. As a future leader of Nassau County, what mix of policy and funding proposals would you want to see in that panel's recommendations?
Oh, that's a great question. The first thing I would do is make sure that we have a really strong advocate on the MTA board representing Nassau. Suffolk does at the moment. I think, you read about the Suffolk guy in the paper all the time. Nassau, nobody knows who he is, and I don't think he's our best advocate. So I would make sure that I recommend an appointment of someone who really does stand up for us, for our commuters, and for our residents. Now, I'm very excited to see that the third track is on track, because I think the more you can get people on and off and around the island, the better. Now, we have to work hard to make sure that the funding comes through on these projects and the other projects that affect our trains, the way our trains operate. I would also look to how, not just trains, but also buses. I would encourage more people to ride the bus, even if they don't have to, because I think the more that we have choice riders, the better the service will be. And there are interesting examples all over the country right now where, you know, the example of the person standing at the bus stop on the corner is kind of dying out. There are smaller buses, more flexible routes, more app-based ways of you know, making an appointment to catch the bus. That's something I'm very excited about pursuing. And, you know, every dollar that's spent on our bus system generates many, many more dollars in economic activity. And that's something that's key. So it's not just, you know, for people who need to ride the bus. And obviously, that's important for people who need to take the bus to doctor's appointments, to take the bus to, you know, whether they're going to university or to their jobs. That's economic development right there. But I would love to see where people would, you know, riding the bus is something that they would want to do. I also think ride sharing, I'm very glad that now it's legal to do ride sharing here in Nassau County, within Nassau County, because as you say, young people just aren't driving as much as, you know, people my age.
Adrian, you're up again.
Am I out of time?
You're a model.
I had one more thing, but I can add it.
You know, we're not debating it anymore. And Long Island is at the forefront of climate change impacts. New York State, both the legislature and the governor have set a goal of achieving 50% renewables by the year 2030. But we will not be able to do that unless we have offshore wind as part of our energy portfolio. Legislator Curran, will you support offshore wind off of Long Island with the site-specific environmental assessment to help us reach the goal of 50% renewables by 2030?
Absolutely, yes. I think we have to look to renewable energy. I think wind is a gift, and we should be harnessing it. And anything we can do to make that happen, we should be. Also, renewable energy is a growing industry. That's a real job creator for us, and I don't want to be on the losing end of that and seeing other regions capitalizing on that while we're not. I was very proud to have fought against the LNG port off the coast of Long Beach, because that is not renewable energy. That is old energy. Fossil fuel, we've got to look to new ways. There are many other kinds of renewable energy as well. We have solar, and I understand from a lot of people who do solar panels, who install the solar panels, have a really hard time with the permitting, because they have to deal with the towns, the villages, and it's all different permits. They expire at different times. I think we have to work really hard with our partners in government to streamline the permitting, so that we can make it easier for people to do this sort of thing. It's the right thing to do for our environment. It's also the right thing to do for our economy. And when you talk about climate change, I am concerned with the rhetoric coming from our president. The fact that he said that we should get out of, that we will be getting out of the Paris Climate Accord, I find is very troubling. Especially we on a coastal community, and living on the South Shore, you see the ravages of climate change. So it's important to, I was actually very heartened to see that many governors and mayors all over the country were saying they're going to stick with the accords, and I have vowed as county executive I will do the same. So, interesting things will be coming in 2020 when the deadline happens. The other thing is our president has said that no longer is it necessary, when you're using taxpayer money to build infrastructure, no longer is it necessary to take into account climate change. And I have vowed as county executive, I will make sure that every penny of taxpayer money used for infrastructure will be built to withstand rising sea levels, flooding, etc. Because if it doesn't, it's a waste of your money, and we'll end up having to pay more down the road to fix it.
Sure. So this one relates to sustainability and smart growth, but also has an economic development component. So to focus growth in our downtown business districts and encourage transit use, the Nassau IDA over the last 7 years has provided tax incentives to thousands of units of rental housing and mixed-use development adjacent to Long Island Railroad stations. Now again, these projects have been driven by local community folks, who received their local municipal approvals. Folks on Nassau County and Long Island don't do regional planning or don't want social engineering from other perspectives. They really like to see local planning. So in this election year, we know attacking IDA incentives is politically popular. But these projects have been anchors of numerous Main Street revitalization efforts. So will you continue? I was just doing one this morning in Farmingdale, affordable component, good stuff. So will you continue this policy as county exec?
You know, I talk about Farmingdale all the time as the perfect example of transit-oriented development. In 4 years, it's gone from 0 to 60 because of the range of housing options that are there now. The downtown is totally revitalized. Every storefront is full, restaurants. The biggest problem they have now is you can't find a place to park on a Saturday night, which is not such a bad problem to have. IDAs do play a serious role, and I think that they are subject to attack because when you have, say, 9 self-storage facilities in the past 3 years getting tax breaks, those are not economic drivers. Those are not creating jobs, maybe a couple. So IDAs, when done right, can be a real motivator and a real way to bring business and to bring development, the right kind of development into Nassau County, which we need. So let's make sure that we have really good people appointed to the IDA board, that they're good at finance, they're good at land use, they're good at planning. Let's make sure that when we do a deal with a developer or with a business, let's make sure that there are real jobs being created or real taxes being generated from that, so that taxpayers are paid off, that they are their investment is returned. That is key. I think we could use a little more transparency in our IDA. A lot of people don't know what it is or how it operates. So I say open up the meetings to the public, let the public come and give their input. I think that's key. When you talk about getting community buy-in for projects, that's the ground floor way that you can begin to do that. Because it's true, you can't force things on communities here on Long Island. We've learned that. You've got to get buy-in. I think the IDA is actually a real asset, but let's use it properly, and let's make sure that if the developer doesn't do what was promised or the business did not create the jobs promised, let's make sure there's a real muscular mechanism to get that money back and give it back to the taxpayer.
Thank you.
How would you create and support additional revenue for Nice Bus?
Oh, that's a good question. So when the routes were cut this past year, I suggested several pots where the money could come from. One was, there was money that had been borrowed, one batch was 10 years ago, one batch was 8 years ago, specifically for buses that was never spent. That money is still there. What we need, this would be more of a one-shot. Also, our fund balance is way more than it needs to be. That's another place where we get it. But again, that's just a one-shot. And I think what you're talking about is recurring revenue, and that's key. One issue that has been floated in Albany, which I support wholeheartedly, is using a small piece of ride-sharing money, whether it's Uber or Lyft or any of those, 25 cents, 50 cents per ride, whatever it is, to go towards buses. It makes sense because it's all part of transportation. We could also use perhaps a very small portion of the MTA payroll tax, a small sliver, which we're already paying, and put that towards the buses as well. Another thing we could do is our red light camera revenue this year was $12 million over budget. Let's use some of that money towards buses. Again, it's within the theme of transportation. It's recurring, obviously. Let's use it for our buses.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
So the first is, what is the most important environmental issue facing the county, and how would you address it?
Well, I think the most crucial issue beyond the ravages of climate change is the aquifer. We get our water from one place, and that's under the ground. Let's make sure that we protect that water. So I'm concerned that New York City is looking to open about almost 70 wells in Queens, and that water, we don't get another source of water. The city does get another source of water. They can get it in Catskills, there are other places. I think they're concerned about flooding in their basement, so they want to bring down the water table, but the consequences for us could be disastrous. The consequences could include salt water intruding into our water, our drinking water, making it undrinkable. Also, it could also cause the Grumman and Lake Success plumes to shift or change direction. And now the Grumman plume has now grown to be 4 miles by 2 miles and 800 feet deep. We can't afford for that to even grow more. I mean, it's almost reaching Massapequa. I mean, that actually leads me to a whole other question, how we fix that. And I was actually very happy to see Congressman King and Congressman Swazi work together to secure funding to begin to clean that up. We need to fight for more. And the fact that it's gone on this long and that the Navy and Grumman have not been held accountable all these years, all these decades, is really awful.
Thank you. Open space in Nassau County from development.
That's a great question because we're pretty much developed.
Yeah.
So, what we do is we keep what we've already got and keep it green. It's also a good way to recharge the aquifer and to filter the water nicely. We can also use the space that we've got and use it more wisely. You know, we talk about infill. Sometimes you see there's a bit of a suburban sprawl. So how do we do development? It's already concrete. Infill those empty spaces with transit-oriented development, with the right kind of development, with the buy-in of the community, of course. The other thing that's interesting, there's a lot of new technology right now. The county in my district, it's on the Baldwin-Freeport border, has redone a boat basin. And the parking lot of the boat basin was done with permeable pavement. It's expensive, and so we can only do it in small places for now. But I'm hoping this is a technology that might become less expensive down the road, and that's a way so that not only does it prevent flooding down in our South Shore area, it also keeps the water, gets the water back down to the aquifer, filtering through. So that's another smart technology that we can really capitalize on. You know, something I'm very excited about with all of the potential and all of the initiatives that we have, I think we should have a resiliency officer, and that is someone that I'm looking to appoint. Someone who's a resiliency officer to coordinate all of these different things, work with our Department of Public Works, work with the IDA, work with our other departments to sort of coordinate our efforts to preserve our environment.
Thank you. You partially addressed it before, but I think folks want to hear more. What do you see as the future of Nassau County when it comes to solar and wind energy and charging stations for electric vehicles?
Well, I think at the county, we should have, just start at the county government offices, have charging stations for electric cars. So we have an employee who works at the county who has an electric car, and he was plugging in his car, there's a thing in the side of the building, and he was written a letter from the county attorney to cease and desist because he was stealing county property.
Oh my God.
I'm not making it up. We can start just in our own house by doing it properly, by encouraging our employees to use electric vehicles. That's pretty simple.
Thank you. Will you support legislation that provides for equitable distribution of resources to communities that are impacted by climate change, specifically communities of color, which are often left out?
Well, obviously, we have many different communities here in Nassau County, and we have to make sure that they are all treated fairly and given respect. And it's no different when it comes to the effects of climate change. Where I live down on the South Shore, there's still houses that are empty, that are zombie houses because of Superstorm Sandy. And I feel that these are people who did not have an advocate. They did not have an advocate helping them get through the process and to make sure that they're able to rebuild. And that's something that I look forward to doing. So what I've done as a legislator is helping them connect them, whether it's New York Rising or small business funds or whatever it is, to get the resources they need to begin to rebuild.
Thank you. Last. No, we're not going to ask you that one. You speak about renewable energy sources. Why not recycle sewage and turn it into drinkable water rather than dumping it into our oceans?
Well, that's not so crazy.
No, not at all.
The people who run our sewage treatment plants, Bay Park and Cedar Creek, are working on a project. So I'll try to explain it in a not boring way. So
there's nothing boring about this answer.
So sewage, you treat sewage, it comes out kind of looking like water. You might not want to drink it, but it does look like water. At the same time, our sewage treatment plants use millions of gallons of water. I don't know how many per day. Probably hundreds of thousands of gallons of water per day to do the work of the work, the cooling and all the water that's necessary to do the work of sewage treatment. So they draw water out of the aquifer to do the work of the sewage treatment plant. So they're working on something right now where they're going to take treated effluent, treat it just a little bit more, and then use that to do the work of the sewage treatment plant, to do the cooling and whatever it is that they do. It's all very complicated. So instead of drawing water out of our aquifer to do this, why not use the water that's being produced? And they're very close to making this happen. It's very exciting. Maybe one day we'll get to the point where we can use it to do golf courses and gardening and that sort of thing, and maybe even drink it. I don't know. Maybe, human beings are brilliant. Maybe one day we can come up with that.
Thank you very much. So
So I just want to thank you so much. I love talking about this stuff because it is what government can do well. We can really help to make our island be environmentally sound and to be safe and to keep us all a little bit more healthy. So I just want to close by saying that, I moved to Nassau County 20 years ago. My husband and I moved before we had kids, and we came for the Long Island dream. Single-family house, great school down the block, the parks, the beaches, the whole 9 yards. And it just seems to me that, we knew that we would be paying high taxes, but it was part of a deal that we were willing to make. But as a legislator and as a taxpayer, it's very frustrating to watch our money being spent on bloated patronage, on, I don't know if you saw the cover of Newsday today, but on nepotism, on these bloated contracts, when we could be using it to develop technology to make our world a little greener and a little safer. We could be using it for the services that you expect from your local government, because it's your money that's wasted on these patronage jobs, on these bloated contracts. I'm in this race because I want to work really hard to begin to restore trust in government, to make sure that I hire people based on what they know, not who they know. That your money is not meant to fund my next re-election campaign. It's not meant to be a jobs program for my friends and family. It's meant for services for you. That's why I'm in this race. I'm really eager to get to work, if you trust me and elect me as your county executive, to get to work and give Nassau County the fresh start that it sorely deserves. And I thank you very much for your attention.
I want to start by thanking Marcia and the League of Conservation Voters for hosting this forum. I also want to thank our panelists, the Citizens Campaign for the Environment, Division Long Island, and Tri-State Transportation, because these three groups, amongst others, but certainly these three groups, have been at the forefront of our discussions regarding the environment, certainly on Long Island, for as long as I can remember. And it's great to be part of this discussion. I believe strongly in the old Kenyan proverb that we don't inherit the land from our parents, we borrow it from our children. And if we understand that, and that is our motivating factor, I think we get good things done. Here on Long Island, unfortunately, that hasn't always been the case. If we look at water quality and the way that we have treated our sole source aquifer historically, if we look at the lack of comprehensive sewering, and therefore the nitrogen outflow to our bays and sounds, we see that we do have environmental and significant environmental issues that it is our responsibility to take care of and not simply keep kicking the can down the road. There are options here for us. In the first hand, certainly the county plays a critical role in terms of setting its own priorities and investments in infrastructure that allow us to deal with those issues. I've had a history of dealing with them as a mayor and certainly as a member of the state Senate, working with colleagues across the aisle, most particularly Michelle Schimmel in the Assembly. But if there's a critical issue for us here on Long Island, it's water, and we can deal with transportation, the need for environmental sensitivity when it comes to energy, wind energy, and the opportunities that that presents to our economy going forward. We can talk about the need to expand bus service, and I'm looking forward to the opportunity to answer all of those questions over the course of the next half hour. Thank you.
Okay. Good afternoon, Senator. This is working. I don't even know if I need it. So you have to know what my first question is, and my first question is regarding the Bay Park sewage treatment plant. Because 85% of all the nitrogen loading into the Western Bays is coming from the Bay Park sewage treatment plant and the Long Beach sewage treatment plant in combination, will you work to expedite, and the key word here is expedite, the hookup of the Long Beach sewage treatment plant to the Bay Park sewage treatment plant to the current existing water viaduct under Sunrise Highway to discharge out to the existing ocean outflow pipe in Cedar Creek, which would go to the ocean. There's general consensus this is the right thing to do, the smart thing to do, but it needs to be expedited and ushered along because there's multi-layers of government that are involved.
Thank you, Adrian. I appreciate it. Everyone knows that we're talking about a critical need on Long Island, how we discharge our effluent into the South Bay is incredibly important. Right now, both Long Beach and Bay Park go out into Reynolds Channel, and we know what the effect of that is. Someone came up with the ingenious proposal of connecting via this old water viaduct under Sunrise Highway between Bay Park and Cedar Creek. The most complicated part of that is going to be how do we connect from Bay Park itself to this water viaduct. I had an opportunity to speak to AECOM, who did the forensics, the analysis of, just this past week, of the viaduct. It's viable, it's available, we can achieve it, we need to move forward immediately, but we also have to move forward immediately and quickly at the same time that we're beginning to deal with the viaduct, with the connectivity between Bay Park and this viaduct. It's important that we do so. There are a couple of different options out there, but the sooner we do that, the sooner we're able to close the Long Beach sewer treatment plant, connect it to Bay Park, take Bay Park, connect it to the viaduct, connect it to Cedar Creek or thereabouts, because it doesn't actually go through the Cedar Creek plant. It'll go lateral to it, it'll go out to the outfall pipe, and then it'll be discharged about 3 miles out. And why is that important? When we talk about nitrogen loading, as Adrian just mentioned, it is incredibly important that we understand what the impacts of that are. One, it's killed our shellfishing industry. Two, it's killed our coastal wetlands. And what we realized after Sandy is that those coastal wetlands play a pivotal role in protecting our communities in the event of tidal surge, in the event of these 500-year storms that we seem to get every year. And so let's understand it is in our best interest to move as quickly as possible, and certainly you have my commitment that that is exactly what we're going to do. Thank you.
Thank you.
This is an environmental issue, but also a human one. Nassau County has some of the most dangerous roads in New York State for pedestrians and bicyclists. These conditions persist while there's an expansion of downtown housing, restaurants, bars, a growing 55 and up population, and record numbers of young people not seeking to drive. As county executive, what will you do to encourage walkability and complete streets while fixing many poorly designed Nassau County roadways?
Thank you. Yes, as we consider the next generation of not only hopefully downtown residents in our downtown communities, when we focus on transit-oriented development, but how they get around and the need to get around safely. I was happy to have supported the Safe Streets legislation in Albany that has now made it a requirement that when we redo streets, when we engineer, redesign streets, that we do so in a way that is safe not only for drivers, but also for cars, but also for pedestrians and for bicycle users. For us, it's a question of who we are as a county. We are a county that has to have every option available for transportation. That includes bicycles, that includes pedestrians. We need to make sure that we keep our roads safe. I happen to represent one of the most dangerous areas for pedestrians in all of New York State. Hempstead Turnpike, more fatalities, people trying to cross the street. And those concepts of complete streets have to be an integral part of what we do. Certainly, the county has literally hundreds of miles of county roads. Some of the most heavily traveled roads in Nassau County are county roads, and so it's our responsibility to make sure that as these roads are redesigned, they are maintained using complete street concepts as well. And certainly that is my commitment for myself and for my community as we stress the need for transit-oriented development, and we continue to seek that in our downtowns, myself and Mineola and other communities having done so as well. This concept of complete streets becomes even more important. The connectivity to our train stations, and rather than creating more and more traffic and car traffic, the opportunity to actually link into other types of transportation as well. Thank you.
Thank you.
Follows on Eric's a little bit. You talked about transit-oriented development, but an important part of that is the transit. And we know right now that that's actually something that's hurting at the moment. Now, Governor Cuomo has recently announced the appointment of an advisory panel tasked with coming up with proposals to address the twin crises that we're dealing with right now. The first of those being underfunding of the MTA, including Long Island Railroad, and also congestion for folks traveling into and out of the central business district of Manhattan. As a future leader of Nassau County, what mix of policy and funding proposals would you like to see in that panel's recommendation?
Thank you. No, I appreciate that, because one of the glaring I think deficiencies in the governor's proposal and in his composition of his panel is that he didn't have a representation from Nassau County. Now, the panel is focusing on New York City, and the need for New York City to deal with congestion in its, certainly in its downtown, south of, I guess, 42nd. If they're going to do that, and New York City is going to have to come to grips for themselves on how best to do that, if they're going to do that, that may create greater traffic in our own downtowns as more and more people take the trains, which is fine, which means we, as a region, have to be better prepared to deal with parking issues, connectivity from our homes to our train stations so that people aren't taking cars to the train, so we can provide access points for people to be able to actually take the trains, and also make it more affordable, because right now, a round-trip ticket from Mineola to Penn Station peak is $20+ dollars. And so, yes, if you want to do something that's actually going to save money and encourage or create a revenue stream and encourage people to take mass transit, then I think you also have to make sure that mass transit is more affordable than it is right now. And I'd love to see them take that money, and if they're going to use it for the Long Island Railroad, use it to keep our fares down, and that would go a long way towards encouraging people to leave their cars at home and take the railroad, because right now, I'll tell you, as a parent, when I take my children into the city, I almost have to take out a loan in order to afford to pay for the round trip on the Long Island Railroad between my wife and I and our 4 kids. And unfortunately, we shouldn't have that consideration as a backup to taking our own car. It should be affordable. It has to be affordable. And if we're going to do something with congestion pricing, let's take the money and make sure that we make our fares affordable here in Nassau County. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Senator, climate change is real. Long Island is on the forefront, or the front lines, I should say, of climate change impacts. And New York State, as you well know, has declared that 50% of our energy needs will come from renewable energy sources by the year 2030. Will you, Senator, support offshore wind as part of that energy mix in order to help us meet that goal? Of course, offshore energy with site-specific environmental assessment. Will you support it and help it along?
Absolutely. I'm curious, at 50% by 2030, I happen to have visited Portugal a couple of years ago, and they asked me to take a tour of their renewable portfolio. Portugal today gets more than 60% of its electricity from renewable energy, whether it's hydro, wind, photovoltaic, and biomass. They're able to get over 60% with a country of very limited means. And so they've made the investment in infrastructure that they need to, and certainly if they can, we are no less able to do so ourselves. I'm a big believer in offshore wind. I believe that it is certainly a great resource for us. If we understand that the corridor for offshore wind runs from essentially the Block Island area south to southern Jersey, which is essentially to the east of Long Island, we're in a great position to not only benefit from cheap energy that comes from wind, we also understand the great strides that they're taking in developing battery technology and the ability to store this energy, and that's predominantly out at Brookhaven National Lab. We're going to take great strides for that. But as an economic boost for us, right now the largest offshore wind project in the entire country is a New York project taking place off the east end of Long Island, and it is being staged from Rhode Island. That means the jobs are in Rhode Island. That means that the economic development of that money is in Rhode Island, and it needs to be here on Long Island. If we're going to make a commitment to offshore wind as a renewable energy source, then we also have to make a commitment that we want those jobs here. We want to stage those here. And let's face it, ladies and gentlemen, we live on an island. We have a maritime history. Let's embrace our maritime history. Let's make the commitment to retool our ports, make it a priority for us that we want those jobs here, not only the manufacturing jobs for the blades and the turbines, but also the opportunities that we have to actually have high-paying jobs that go towards engineering the next generation of offshore wind. Thank you.
To focus growth, sorry, I'm too loud, but the mic is fine. So to focus growth in our downtown business districts and encourage transit uses, the Nassau IDA over the last 7 years has provided tax incentives to thousands of units of rental housing and mixed-use development adjacent to Long Island Railroad stations. Now, these plans have been driven by local communities in downtowns Nassau County residents or Long Islanders don't like regional planning or social engineering, so there's a home rule message here that says these plans have been supported from the local governments. We know, though, in a political campaign, attacking IDA incentives is politically popular during this time in an election year. But these projects have been anchors for numerous Main Street revitalization efforts. So will you continue this policy as county exec?
Thank you, Eric. You know, in my experience, certainly my experience as Mayor of Mineola, master plan, transit-oriented development, overlay district in our downtown, you see the effects of what a community can do when it comes together and decides for itself, the commitment that it has to expanding its housing stock, providing for affordability, senior and next generation affordability. And I do believe that there is a role for county government in that. I believe the county needs to work with our local communities in order to identify those areas where transit-oriented development makes sense. Now, I can throw out Hicksville as an example. Certainly we see what's happening in Farmingdale, Mineola, Westbury, Rockville Center, some projects up in Glen Cove. We, as a county, can also work to expedite and to incentivize these projects. What I would do differently is that I would require developers who come into a community who are going to seek tax credits through the IDA to make sure that they, when they submit their permits with the local communities, tell them that they're going to be asking for help as well. It's important because many of these communities, and I understand that all too well, feel like they have been let down. You have developers who come before the zoning boards in local communities and say, I need greater density, I need an extra floor, I need a smaller footprint for our apartments. And if you give me the greater density, I will have the ability to build this. And the community makes the decision to support their request, and in doing so, gives them the variance that they otherwise wouldn't have gotten. What ends up happening then is they expect that there's going to be a revenue stream there and a tax base that comes back to the community as a result. And the first thing the developer does after they've gotten their approvals is go to the IDA and ask for tax credits, which undermines what the expectation was in the community. Let's make sure that there's transparency, that a developer has to identify that they're going to seek tax credits, and let the community be part of that discussion before they make decisions, not after the fact, which has caused so much of the friction that we see out there today.
The importance of connectivity between Long Island Railroad and using transit to get people there. My last question for you is, if you're elected, how would you create and support additional revenue for Nice Bus?
You know, one of the first things I did when I was elected to the state senate back in 2010, 2011, I was identified as one of the 50 most influential people on Long Island by the Long Island Business News, who said that my efforts to secure funding for Long Island Bus was the underpinning of that, by being able to secure additional funding from the state. If you understand that Nice Bus has about a $130 million budget, 66 million of that comes from New York State, about 45 or 50 million of it comes from the fare box. The county itself, I think, puts in $6 million, and the rest of it comes from ancillary fees, federal government and the like. It's unbelievable to me that the county is only providing $6 million a year towards a bus system that is such a critical part of the economy of this county, where 20 years ago they were paying $20 million into the same bus system. At that point it was an NTA bus. So let's understand it's our responsibility to put money in place, because most people who take the bus have no other option. We want them to leave their cars at home, we want them to take the bus to the train station, but we also want those people who are going to work, going to school, going to their doctor's offices and appointments, that they have access to a vibrant bus system here on Long Island. I have suggested that for ride-hailing, that we have a surcharge, Uber, Lyft, and the like, that there be a surcharge and a commitment that that money go specifically. If they're predicting that there's going to be about 10 or 11 million rides in Nassau County alone per year, a 50-cent surcharge would put about $5 or $6 million directly into bus service, which will allow us to enhance bus service. And if you look at the position between the ride-hailers and the traditional cabs, and the costs that are associated with traditional cabs, the 50-cent surcharge is not only appropriate, it would go a long way towards providing a steady revenue, a dedicated revenue stream for our bus service as well. Thank you.
Thank you. So,
most important environmental issue facing the county, and how would you address it?
As I mentioned earlier, I think the most critical issue facing us as a region, and certainly Nassau County, is our water supply, making sure that we protect our sole source aquifer, and that means against all comers, really. We live on an island, and we have an aquifer that is tied together not only for Nassau County, but Suffolk, Nassau, and Queens and Brooklyn. It is our responsibility to protect it, because whereas New York City has other options to get their water from upstate, for reservoirs upstate, our only plan A, B, right through Z, is getting our water from our sole source aquifer. And we haven't treated it very well over the years. Historically, with our industrial and manufacturing years here, post-World War II, a lot of damage was done to the aquifer, and we're seeing some of the effects today, whether it's in Bethpage, whether it's in Lake Success, and other areas. We have seen that our water supply has been under constant attack. Now, we have great water providers, district commissioners out here. My own village of Mineola had its own water department. We do a good job at maintaining our water supply and making sure that it is clean, as clean or more so than the stuff you buy in bottles. But we have a responsibility to do more than that. And we have a responsibility to our surface water, as I said earlier, to make sure that we protect our coastal waterways, to make sure that we enhance our sewer systems and our sewer treatment plants, and make sure that the years and decades of nitrogen charging and loading in our bays and the Sound are a thing of the past. Thank you.
Thank you. Would you preserve open space in Nassau County from development?
Well, here's the good news in Nassau County, and for that question. We don't have farms anymore. We don't have farms anymore. We don't have the kinds of open space issues that perhaps they have to the county to our east, and that's a shame. But the reality is we do have open space. We have to make sure that we preserve it. Most of our economic development going forward and our transit-oriented development going forward is going to be predicated upon reusing space that has already been used and taking and assembling parcels and rebuilding on those. And we've seen examples of those, again, those communities that have done transit-oriented development to this point. It has been predicated on assembling parcels in our downtowns. We did it in Mineola. Parcels came together and they were able to build. You see it happening in Westbury. You saw it happening in Farmingdale. We are mature communities, and so that development is going to take place not on existing open space, but it's going to take place on existing used space that is now being recalibrated and brought into the 21st century to meet not only our energy requirements, our parking requirements, hopefully our density requirements, so that we have a more robust selection of housing than we have currently. You know, Nassau County simply doesn't have the housing stock and the variety of housing stock that it needs, and a lot of that is going to be taking place in our downtowns, around our train stations, in a way that I think is most effective. And so the commitment to open space is there. Protect our parks, make sure they're there and available, invest in them, make sure that they are as good as they've ever been, but it's going to be an easier task than perhaps in other places where open space is more readily there. Thank you.
Thank you. There are areas you could rift on. What do you see as the future of Nassau County when it comes to solar and wind energy and charging stations for electric vehicles?
Thank you. I'll start with the charging stations because that's easy. You know, infrastructure-wise, it really is. You know, if we made the commitment to having charging stations more readily available, and we can see best practices in other states and other countries where they've actually taken the initiative, and so they have a much more robust use of electric vehicles because people trust the infrastructure to be there in order to recharge those vehicles. We really haven't done it here, and it's something that we should be committed to doing, you know, as a region. Having said that, again, the need for a full array of renewable energy resources, we should actually look at our entire portfolio and see where it makes sense. Are we going to put photovoltaic cells as car canopies in our parking lots? Yeah, we should. Why not? Why aren't we doing that right now? We have literally acres and acres of asphalt that we can use to create energy and electricity right now through PV. We have this corridor of offshore wind that exists immediately to the east of Long Island, and having spoken to Deep Water Wind, they tell me, and I believe it if you just look at a map, no one is better positioned in Long Island to be able to build, maintain, develop that offshore wind corridor. And you know what? Shame on us and shame on New York State if they're not going to prioritize making sure that that equipment, that those blades, that those turbines, and that those bases are built here on Long Island, that we retool a few of our ports to be able to serve as shipping areas to transport that material and that labor out there to be able to do it. And frankly, if we're going to spend billions and billions of dollars over the next 10, 20 years with a commitment to renewable energy and offshore wind, I want to make sure that money is here in Nassau County's economy. Thank you.
Thank you. That provides for equitable distribution of resources to communities that are impacted by climate change, specifically communities of color who are often left out.
Equitable distribution of resources is tax money, investment. We have to look at how we are dealing with a county that is predominantly viewed as being affluent, while at the same time understanding that we do have areas of significant poverty. We also have areas of significant poverty in places that you wouldn't necessarily think of, where people have a home, but they're struggling to make their mortgage, pay their taxes, raise their families, because the high cost of living here isn't an accident. We do have the highest or amongst the highest costs of living anywhere in the country, so we do have people who are relatively wealthy given their homes, but still are living with some real challenges. And so how we take those resources and how we distribute those resources, whether it is resources having to do with, I guess, infrastructure improvements, whether it's resources having to do with access to cheap renewable energy, whether it's water safety and making sure that we have water quality issues, not only in those areas that are more affluent, but I do believe that for the most part, we have that kind of synergy taking place. I've never seen, in my own experience, that certain areas have been cut out from access to resources that way, but we do have to be sensitive to it. So I appreciate the question.
Thank you. And the last question, they get more ingenious about recyclable energy sources. Why not recycle sewage and turn it into drinkable water rather than dumping it into our oceans?
Thank you for whoever asked that question. I think it's an interesting point. I was happy to participate in the Great Neck pollution control district, sewer district that they have there, and they just redid it. It is a state-of-the-art facility. And when we were there for the ribbon cutting, they cut the ribbon and they said, they treat the sewage here to a level that you can actually drink it. It's potable. And I said, you first. Look, the reality is this. I had the opportunity and certainly to meet with different groups who do participate in this, and there are ways that we can actually treat water to a level where it can be used for other things. It can be used for irrigation. It can be used for plant maintenance and different things where we're not just wasting literally potable water that has been brought up, that we can reuse it for certain purposes. The idea of reusing it for drinking, I'm not there yet, but I do, and I can tell you that we can use that if we are willing to make the commitment and investment in infrastructure to actually treat it to the level it has to be treated to. More importantly than that, folks, when you send it out 3 miles out, the dilution rate of this particular use, the effluent, the treatment that it receives, is going to have a negligible effect on the ocean as far out as it is. It is those coastal wetlands that we have closer to shore that are impacted by having it released right there, and we can see what happened in places like Reynolds Channel. So, yes, I'd like to see part of this reused in a way that makes sense, whether it's for irrigation or for use in maintenance and the like. But I do think we're going to have to focus on continuing the current process, which is getting the stuff as far away from shore as possible, where it's going to have less of an impact on our coastal wetlands, on our coastal economy, and our coastal environment. Thank you. Thank you all very much. You know, there are a lot of issues in play in this year's election. The election is just a few short weeks away, and I would just encourage everybody to do your homework, read up on the candidates, come out to vote on November 7th, whoever you're voting for. You know, it's important that we do that. But whether the challenges are our environment, whether their challenges are infrastructure improvements, whether the challenges are economic development, folks, it all comes down to the county's ability to pay for its own economy or its own budget. And for 17 years, we've been under an oversight board appointed from Albany, a 7-member board that isn't elected and makes decisions for ourselves, and that has affected our ability to make those kinds of decisions for ourselves. So let's make a commitment that we're going to take control of our own finances, pay our bills, make sure that we balance our budget, and in doing so, commit the resources. In doing so, we can get rid of NIFA, so we can commit the resources for ourselves regionally for these kinds of priorities. So whether it is the environment, whether it is infrastructure improvement, whether it's transit-oriented development, whether it's economic development in general going forward and creating the jobs that we all want in order to make sure that our children have the ability to come home, find jobs, buy a home, rent an apartment, and stay here. The best years for this county are ahead. I believe that very strongly. But it is also contingent upon us here in the room and out there making some decisions about taking control of our own county. And the idea that we haven't been able to do so to this point should be shameful to all of us, myself included. But let's make a commitment to right that ship, fix our finances, and make the kind of commitment that we need going forward. Thank you.